Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Nick, and I help direct events here at the Strand. Before we launch into tonight's event with Kyle Newman, Jon Peterson, and Michael Witwer, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 93 years, Strand is the sole survivor. Now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We'd like to thank you all for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight, we're excited to have with us Kyle Newman, Michael Witwer, and Jon Peterson, the masterminds behind D&D Art and Arcana. This week marked the launch of their new book, Heroes Feast, a D&D Cookbook. Kyle is a Hugo Award-nominated author and award-winning filmmaker who has directed numerous feature films, including Fanboys, written by Ernest Cline, and Barely Lethal, starring Samuel L. Jackson for A24 Films. A24, pardon me. His client list includes the Microsoft Corp, Interscope Records, Stars Entertainment, the Coca-Cola Company, 20th Century Fox, Entertainment Weekly, Universal Republic Music, BuzzFeed, and Lucasfilm Limited, to name a few. Michael is a best-selling author known for his work on the Hugo-nominated and aforementioned Dungeons Dragons Art and Arcana, and the critically acclaimed Empire of Imagination, Gary Gygax, and the Birth of Dungeons and Dragons. Widely considered an expert on D&D history, Michael has spoken on the topic at a variety of venues, such as Google, Pixar, Lucasfilm, top gaming conventions, and book festivals, and on NPR's All Things Considered. His books have won many honors, including being selected as a Hugo Award finalist, a Diana Jones Award nominee, a Locus Award finalist, and a Geek Dad Best Book of the Year. Last but certainly not least, we have Jon, who is a widely recognized authority on the history of games. His book, Playing at the World, was called The First Serious History of the Development of Dungeons and Dragons by the Village Voice. He has contributed to many academic anthologies on games, including Zones of Control and role-playing game studies, as well as gaming and geek culture websites. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jon, Kyle, and Michael to the stage.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. So thank you, Strand, for having us. We had an absolute joy. It was about 2 years ago today. We were in New York City promoting Art and Arcana. That was our first collaboration, Art and Arcana, Visual History of Dungeons and Dragons. Again, with 10 Speed Press and Penguin Random House. And I was a NYU grad, and so I walked by the Strand every day. That was my home bookstore. So it was quite a honor and a pleasure to come there as an author. And it's just amazing to be back here today with the Strand talking about our book, which we are extremely proud of. It's called Heroes Feast, the official Dungeons and Dragons cookbook. And it is, in nearly 50 years of Dungeons and Dragons, it is the first official cookbook. Now, you already gave us this wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. Normally, I would handle that for us. So why don't we cut right to it, guys, and get into the meat. Let's talk Dungeons and Dragons, ... and dining. So I'll talk a little bit of how this project came about, because it goes back to Art and Arcana. And when we were, Art and Arcana was about to be unleashed on the world, and we were discussing with our publisher about what else we could do, because we were so proud of our collaboration. We loved working with them, and we also had figured out this rhythm with us as a team. This idea came up about doing something a little off the beaten track, but using our powers together to make something special to tackle this idea of an immersive cookbook. Michael, do you want to get into maybe how some of the backstory on this crazy project?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kyle. And before I start, again, huge props to the Strand, one of my favorite bookstores, one of the absolute best bookstores in the world, if not the best bookstore in the world. So again, thank you for having us back. That talk we did there a couple of years ago was absolutely a highlight of the tour for me, for sure, and I think it was for all of us. So yeah, this was Again, going from one project to another, what a cool opportunity. We obviously had this tight knit group of authors, us three, plus my brother, Sam, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us, of course, for this project. He actually just had too much going on at the time, really wanted to, just couldn't fit into a schedule when we started. So our publisher at 10 Speed approached us about doing a Dungeons and Dragons cookbook. He had thought a lot about it. He was really excited about the idea and all the opportunities that could be presented. And just for background on him, he's over a few different imprints at Penguin Random House. One of them is 10 Speed, the publisher of this book. One of them is Clarkson Potter, who publishes many wonderfully illustrated books, including cookbooks, such as the Barefoot Contessa series. He's the publisher of Barefoot Contessa. So this is a group and this is a publisher who knows cookbooks. That gave us obviously a lot of confidence starting that conversation. And so when he approached us, of course, we're all sitting there thinking, gosh, we love D&D. We all love food. So not a very hard sell. But we thought, where does the rubber hit the road on this? This isn't going to be, a situation where we kind of make a cookbook and throw a D&D logo on the front, right? Of course not. What it really became was this conversation about, let's use this book to enhance the gaming experience. Let's use this book to enhance the social experience around gaming. These are both tabletop activities. They're both really highly social. So how can we use food to improve that? And that was really where we started as an author team and where our publisher started with us on that. So of course we took it over to Wizards, and Wizards of the Coast loved the idea. They got as excited as we did about it and started bouncing ideas back and forth. It became this hugely collaborative effort. And when I say collaborative, I mean, I've never worked on a project like this with the number of people that both Wizards and 10 Speed committed to it, to help us kind of refine these ideas and ultimately put the product together, as we'll probably talk about. I mean, there was food stylists and photographers, obviously a professional chef that they got from America's Test Kitchen, Adam Reed, just an incredible group of collaborators to really kind of all come together and bring something together that's I think bigger than the sum of its parts. So that was kind of how it all started.
Yeah, and I think to just add a little bit, when we got involved, obviously it's such a unique task. We didn't just want to make a standard old cookbook and brand it Dungeons and Dragons. We took it very seriously, and we said we want to do something unique, and we want to make sure we can add a respectable, reverential, interesting chapter that could stand there and stand the test of time. And that's why I felt like this team came together and doing it. And John is like this incredible food master. I say every time we were on a book tour, we're at a city, and John knows all the best places to eat, knows everything about food. He inspires me in that way. I love cooking. Michael cooks. We're just like, oh my God, this is perfect. John, do you want to talk about like how we approach development for something so special like this, because it was atypical, and yet we wanted to apply some of the techniques and collaborative spirit that we did from our previous project to this?
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to be able to come fresh into a book like this, to be able to find an angle. It's like super different from what you've done before. And I'm wearing our Art and Arcana tour t-shirts from when we worked on that. And like doing Art and Arcana for me, and I've spent some time looking at the history of D&D, it was fresh to me because it was about the visuals, because it was about the art. And so the idea of going back to 45 years of D&D history and asking really what did D&D have to say about food, right, was like a whole new angle that I never thought to turn over before. And if it hadn't been suggested to us, I might never have gone down this particular path. And it's like kind of challenging. I mean, compared to a traditional media property like a set of novels or movies or something where there's like scenes where people eat something, right? You can point to in Game of Thrones, right? What did they eat at the Red Wedding? There's like, and say, okay, we're going to serve the Red Wedding feast if you're doing something like Game of Thrones. And D&D is much more DIY. D&D is much more about, you choosing your own adventure as you go, down these paths. But at the same time, there are guardrails, there are suggestions, there are guidelines. And some of the guidelines that we found ourselves relying on to try to tell the story of food in D&D were the campaign settings, were things like Greyhawk, Dragonlance, the Forgotten Realms, Eberron, and these existed as transmedia properties. They were game elements, there were modules about them in campaign settings, but then there were also novels and comic books and video games, like all these other things you could kind of draw into it. And so the research task for it was really interesting because it was about scouring all that material and trying to find the things that could make D&D come to life as a food, like, mecca, in a way that I think probably no one had thought of approaching it before.
Yeah, and that was the challenge. But I thought that's why the team. Some people are like, well, what do you, three of you guys, and what do you do? Well, I think we put our heads together and we really vet each thing, just like we did with Art Arcana. If something makes it into the final spread and it's worthy of inclusion, it has to check multiple boxes, and we all look at it from very different ways, and that's where we actually enhance what we're doing. And the same thing with this, we curated a very large list of recipes, and within those recipes we had reasoning for why they should be there. Also just pure menu questions, like what makes a balanced menu, and do we want to overbalance one realm versus the other, and do we have too many human dishes versus elven dishes versus halfling versus dwarven? And then there's the lore side of it, and we also want to be reverential to not just 5th edition, but all editions. So we want it to be a spectrum of ideas. So if you're a 3rd edition player, or you only do original, or you're only familiar with 5th, there's something for everybody. And we all know all these editions of D&D, everyone kind of extrapolates and stands on the shoulder of what came before. And then there's the in-universe history and the in-universe timeline. If you look at like Icewind Dale, which is the current campaign that's out there right now, that's set 100 years after R.A. Salvatore's classic, Crystal Shard, but also set in Icewind Dale. So there's these layers of history to it. And so you have to be aware of the in-universe and the out-of-universe. And we just went through all these old books to deep dive and mine for information. And that's why I like working with somebody like John and like Michael are so thorough. And we just scoured and divided, and it's actually a pleasure writing this stuff. Dungeons and Dragons, like you go home at night, we all have different day jobs, and we get to deep dive into this amazing stuff. Michael, talk about the different types of food. We have human food, and there's definitely a style and a flavor, and it's also regionally based. And it's based on world too. We get into dwarves, and there's their culture, the environments they're in, and where they are in the timeline. All these things affect how they eat. Maybe let's talk about elven food, give some examples, or halfling, whatever. What do you think? What do we talk about tonight?
Yeah, well, sure. We explore all of those with some depth. Yeah, I mean, so that was the other big part, I think, of the research and development process was, as you and John already mentioned, this notion of scouring 45, 50 years of D&D product. And that's, on some level, while that takes a lot of time, that's low-hanging fruit, right? When they talk about Otik spiced potatoes in Dragonlance, that's a no-brainer for inclusion, right? Those are mentioned so often. So, you have to include things like that. What becomes a little bit more challenging is when you think about, well, gosh, if D&D has never done a lot of deep dives on food, or at least not in one place, and I think that's where it really comes, where the rubber hits the road, you start to think about, well, what can we really do to start guiding our menus? And one of the things that we did is we said, well, let's do a really deep dive on every main culture that exists in the D&D realms. So let's look really, really deep dive on human, on elven food, on halflings, on dwarven food. And because you start to realize that, there are patterns that are established when you kind of read the text and you see where these different cultures come from and where they live, and even how they feel about food. Here's a good example. Think about elves. When you think about developing a menu for a culture like this, here's a group of people that lives for 500, 700, 1,000 years. So think about the fact that, what does food mean to a culture like that? And again, you can start to really come up with some really interesting ideas about, well, wow, this is like one of the pieces that connects this group to mortality, among other things, right? Because elves can be killed, right? They're not immortal. They just live for a really long time. So, but they need to eat. So food is part of that experience for them. Might elves be more patient when it comes to braising food or aging their meats or their cheeses, right? Because they have a lot more time to use than, say, humans. So these are the kinds of things we explored. And again, we really, really tried to stick to the text and find different mentions. A good example with elves would be that they largely are a vegetarian people in most mentions of the cultures that we found, whether it be in novels or whether it be in a lot of the lore books. They talk about how elves are really interested in eating vegetables and cheeses and breads, but not as much meats. Not that they don't eat meat, but that it's not as common. And so again, you start to see these things. And so we really went to a lot of trouble to do a lot of deep study on these different cultures. Halflings, of course, that's like all comfort food, right? Halflings are known for having these multi-course meals, these insatiable appetites, and they just love comfort food. So again, these are the kinds of buckets that we started to kind of assemble as we went. And that provided us the structure then to extrapolate properly when we started to find these dishes. Who made them in the various novel or book that we found? How were they sourced? And we could start kind of placing them in that way. And then we could kind of start bouncing the information off each other. Because, I've said this before, we approach this as a core book, essentially, not as a cookbook. That is to say, we basically took the player's handbook and said, well, let's make a player's handbook. But instead of talking about spells and classes, let's just talk about everything through the lens of food. Let's look at the dining etiquette. Let's look at the local ingredients that are available to these different cultures, and let's talk about those things. And that will provide the right depth and context around the individual recipes. So that was kind of the idea.
Yeah, and I think it's just like how we had to stratify in that way. You look at humans and they conquer, they're adaptable, they expand into inhospitable climates, and they kind of can't be kept down. And so some of their food reflects the fact that they can conquer more parts of, say, Toril. You'll find them inhabiting some different places. And then we also look into Underdark and what would be available in the Underdark. Obviously, you can't grow things the same way down there. What is it freshwater fish? Is it mushrooms? Obviously, you're not going to have livestock down there. And it definitely informs, like, dwarves are, more subterranean, and are they going to have the same type of accessibility to fresh fruits and grains like a halfling? Whereas humans, might also pull from these cultures because they also have most of the dominant cities on a planet, and they have to integrate some of these things. So it definitely informs a very unique smorgasbord. So and then dividing up like this was also like one of the big challenges, but also one of the fun parts of it is really figuring out, like, we want to see these types of things in here, but how do we balance these menus? So let's see here, like art and visuals. Art and Arcana was all about art and visuals. Huge focus of our last book. And they're a huge focus this time, but in a very different way, because in Art and Arcana, we were looking backwards. A lot of these really foundational drawings, the purpose of the art was very different, and it informed how you play a game. And here there's visuals, and they're to inform you of how you might bring food to life. And also there's these beautiful chapter breaks, which are to inform you like palate cleansers in between chapters. So visuals are very important in this book, especially food photography, which is something new to D&D. So John, do you want to get into maybe the visual side of this book and what makes it unique and what those challenges were?
Yeah, I mean, challenge and also opportunity. So this was really one of the most fun parts of it. I mean, I'm the kind of person, you see the books and stuff behind me, like I'm like nose down in like dusty fanzines and old D&D manuals all the time. But like this was great fun to just get together, which we did in LA very early this year, for the food photography of this, and actually try to create these environments that were what D&D would look like if it were in the real world. And that is a huge distinction from what we did and what D&D has historically done, what we captured in Art and Arcana, because it was our job to kind of bring D&D to life as something you could put in front of a photographer and you could take a picture of it. It would look like what D&D is supposed to look like. And we did that with a bunch of tricks. I mean, of course, we had fantastic professional chefs who made the food itself that is being photographed, but then we contextualized that food in these little vignettes and these little dioramas that we set up, right? And so we got to rely on professional prop stylists who came in with all sorts of like medieval equipment and cups and plates and things like it. We had so many, knives and daggers and books and just things that looked like they could exist in the D&D universe, right? And fortunately we could rely on people like our friends at Beetle and Grimm, who produce these great deluxe editions of the 5th edition modules that come with a lot of coins or kind of tchotchkes that you would encounter as you were doing an adventure like Saltmarsh or Avernus, something like that. And so we kind of plundered all that material to use it to bring in and kind of scatter these things around the food itself. And we actually, you know, got so wrapped up in this, we ended up commissioning like 3D printed pieces of like artifacts that we could show in this, like that the Talisman of Ultimate Evil, like, you know, Sphere of Dragon Control, and of course the Hand of Vecna, which accompanies a particular dish associated with our friend Joe Manganiello and his character Arken. And so, I mean, I think we kind of went all out on that. And it was just a blast. It was a blast to hang out and do it and shoot it. And then it was a blast to eat the food, which we got to do like after the professional chefs made the versions of this for photography. We got to kind of sample what these would be like if a pro chef was doing it, which was also a blast. And so we took the responsibility of bringing D&D to life in this way, you know, to be able to create these visuals that would represent kind of the real world of D&D very seriously. And we were also fortunate, as Kyle mentioned, to be able to get some great new art made for it, including the beautiful wraparound cover, which has a lot of Easter eggs and kind of references to things in classic D&D. If you want to look at the backside of it especially, you'll see a few familiar characters and scenes from the Yawning Portal there. So yeah, it was just, we hope that people in the community really appreciate like you know, the extent that 10 Speed went to and that Wizards went to make sure that we would capture D&D in a way that was really meaningful for the fans of the game.
This weighed heavily on our shoulders because we debated about, do we do this or not? Do we want to follow up what we did with Art Arcana with something like this that could be misconstrued? But we saw it as a true opportunity to delve into lore, expand on the mythos, and try to ratify things that weren't necessarily handled in that way. And there were sources prior, you know, like the Aurora's guides and the Volo's guides, and they're wonderful resources. If you're a DM playing 5th edition right now and you're looking for ways to imbue your game with just more immersion and specificity, you can go to like a book like the Aurora's Guide, and it's just got all types of ingredients. And that was a resource for us. It's like, okay, what was available there? It's coconut or pineapple or cocoa, you know, cocoa beans, like all these things. You could tell by just how exotic something was by its pricing. And it's also regionally based. Like, is this going to be found here, or is this Mestica, or where can I get these ingredients? So that also informs things like menus. And we did another way we visualized the book was we brought in, we designed 4 menus, one for each of the different planets the realms that we're really specializing in. And Michael's going to show you some right now. You know, the Inn of the Last Home, we've got Yawning Portal, we've got Green Dragon. And this was like a really cool way. So obviously menus had been published, some of them in Volos and things like that. They touched on it a little bit in Avernus. There's like, there's a menu, I think in the back of that one, a 5th edition menu. But we wanted to do a look at all these important realms and give you a sense of some of these key locations where you might find your characters, what a menu looks like if you're a dungeon master or a player, how that might look on your table, what the pricing is, and sometimes the more exotic dishes that we couldn't include. You know, there's things like manticore steak and you know, that you don't want to also fake every ingredient, but we wanted to at least pay homage to some of these things and the references that of dishes and meats and spices that would be available, like a tiefling fire spice. That would kill a human, they still get mentioned in here. So at least we give it the expansive approach that acknowledges that there's more out there beyond our palate or what is readily available. But we really tried to be as authentic as possible and said, we're going to do this, let's do this right. We want this to appeal to people that are back, you know, when the game started in 1974, that played it back then. And we want, or somebody that picked the game up a month or two ago during the pandemic, and to be just as exciting to bring people to the table, not just to play D&D, but to also to cook. So we started to talk about the cover and the illustrations. Mike, do you want to talk about the interior artwork and the expansive illustrations, cinematic illustrations done for the chapter heads of this book and beyond, because that was an undertaking, and there are very specific reasons why we chose what we did.
Yeah, no, I mean, so 10 Speed has tremendous art directors, as does Wizards. And so they were kind enough to let us work closely with them, really kind of work in lockstep. It wouldn't be a D&D book without some really beautiful action-filled illustrations, right? And that was something that was really important to us, that in addition to the photography, which is of course bringing D&D to life, is that we had really beautiful high-end illustrations that felt like D&D. So how do you do that? And so one thing that we came up with as an author team, and again, our collaborators loved these ideas, was this notion that, well, it's almost too easy and frankly not that interesting to just show people eating. I mean, you necessarily have to, right? You know, you can show people at the table in the tavern. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. And in fact, you need to. But there's more to eating than that, right? And so we thought, well, the way to capture the adventure, the right way to do this, let's show the whole cycle of food. So let's show people hunting and gathering and farming. Basically, every part of the food cycle we tried to capture, and it captured in a really kind of adventure-filled way that would be appropriate to a D&D illustration. Again, going back to that notion of that we're making a core book instead of a cookbook. The idea that we just want to capture that same adventure and intrigue of any D&D illustration, but it happens to be through the lens of food. And so that was really what guided all of these. And I was thrilled with the results. I think, again, all the people that collaborated with that. And again, we certainly can't take credit for a lot of how that came out. They just did an incredible job. And it was thrilling to see kind of what they came up with based on some of these ideas we gave them.
Yeah, it's about how you source your food, and there's the traditions, there's the holidays, and there's these overlaps, and there's things that are homages to our world and our calendar. And what's great about the timing of the releases of this book is that it's the holidays are upon us, and there are some elements which obviously we touch on Ravenloft and Curse of Strahd, and there are some recipes that you could be applicable for Halloween, like your Trolltide Candied Apples, and we get into, you know, in Heroes Feast, true fashion, we have a Thanksgiving dinner, and it teaches you how to balance a menu. So if you're looking for a way to spice up your holiday season, I think there's some good options here. And even if you just want to bring, you know, drinks to the table, you know, here I got some mulled cider right here. So that I thought was just like the coolest, and it's not just about one way to visualize. You just think, oh, D&D, a tavern, and you're eating, but seeing you know, these different phases of cooking, right down to, you know, the traditions.
And Kyle, you know, you mentioned the menus. That's another thing I wanted to point out, is just, you know, it was really important to us that there was kind of something for everyone here. You know, if you're a beginning chef, if you're an experienced chef, I think this book works on both those levels. If you know, love playing the game, which I presume most people that would buy this book do, you know, use those menus. Why not? Open up the Green Dragon, or open up the you know, the Celestial Vista restaurant. If you happen to go there and you're playing an Eberron campaign, or if you happen to go to the Yawning Portal, use them in your campaign. Let your players order off those menus. You know, it was really important for us to kind of cover every aspect we could think of, to go back to that original objective of enhancing the tabletop experience. So again, I think that was a lot of the fun of it. And I just, things like that, I think were just so exciting to work on and to kind of vet and develop.
Yeah, this book was 2 years in the making. We spent almost 1 year of, I would say, like soft prep, which was just aggregating information, exploring, adventuring back to all these old books, and compiling lists and sharing notes and screen grabs, and just daydreaming about recipes and how to do justice to this, and to what came before. And it was, there's so many favorite parts. John, do you have a favorite aspect of working on this book, or a favorite memory or day or recipe, or?
I mean, so for recipes, there are a ton of recipes I like. I like a lot of the Drow recipes, you know, the ones that are with, you know, the Underdark Lotus, like the mushroom steaks, you know, the mushroom tea, things like that. Definitely, I also like the Eberron take on it. For me, it was really interesting to look at something like Eberron in the context of the rest of the, you know, largely kind of medieval fantasy settings, have something that's a bit more cyberpunk, where, you know, the Celestial Vista is more like a fine dining establishment, and the dishes we created for it, I think, reflect that. It was a lot of fun to conceive of those. And, you know, like I said, for me, I mean, the real, yeah, I mean, the real delight of working on something like this is being able to contribute to the D&D canon, to take an area that, you know, hasn't really been explored before, and to try to fill in a bit of the lore of that. And anything like that, it's a very solemn and serious responsibility that we take upon ourselves. And, it's only through, looking at the history and understanding these settings, I think, to the degree that we were able to, thanks to the amount of time we had to do the research on this and the tremendous support we got from Wizards and from 10 Speed and so on, that I think we're able to make something that, as Mike suggested, you could just slot right into your campaign. And it'd be great to even serve some of these dishes along with your campaign if you happen to be there. This is, we have a bit of guidance at the end of the book for, as we call it, playing with your food. What to do if you're trying to integrate these dishes into play around the tabletop, and got some guidelines for that if you're doing it at home or at your friendly local gaming shop. Just a bit of things like try not to DM and be responsible for all these dishes at the same time. It's really just too much for most people. And I know I've been there, like when you're hosting, when you're DMing, and you want to be able to, because people are over to your house to make sure they're all fed. What I would typically do then is get takeout, so I wouldn't have to do it myself. But it can be a lot to take on, and so yeah, we try to give you enough guidance that this really will fit into your D&D world and into your D&D play. And in that was the brass ring we're going for, and that was like the real joy of doing it for me.
Yeah, I think I always cook when I having people. I host D&D even if I'm not DMing, and sometimes when I'm DMing, I'm still cooking, and it's either soups or stews or tacos, or why I wanted to include the our version of ratatouille was just something that I was like, oh, I love this, and it's vegetarian. And I think it's just inspired by what we want on our own game nights too, as to what do we think adds a fun community dimension to your game. And this is all about community. You have a little family, you have 6 or 7 people gather to play the game. You're invariably going to eat. You're going to eat probably bad food. We all love Doritos and we all love Oreos, but you can't do that every week. And why not do something that shakes up your game and adds something fun and surprises people? And there's things that don't even require cooking in the book. There's also there's things like iron rations, and there's salads, and there's it's all different meals too, and it's not everything is for a big group. That's the other important thing. We wanted to make sure that this book had options for your off nights. So you want to sit down and read and learn a little bit about halflings and dive into their culture. There's stuff for you to make on your own. It doesn't all have to be with a feast in mind, so it's not all overwhelming. So we definitely kept all those things on the plate while we were building the menu and the direction of the book. What do you think? I think we should open it up to some questions. Okay. Michael Chin says, was food a big part of your own campaign before writing this book? Did it become more prominent after writing it? So who wants to dive into that one? Mike, would you like to talk about the prominence of food in your RPG experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, no, I can say with honesty, no, food was never a big part of any of the campaigns that we ever played. You spend a lot of time in taverns, of course. That's inevitable. I think just about anyone that plays D&D a lot, certainly if you play a lot of modules, or even if you don't, you're going to spend some time in taverns and inns. That's just how it goes. We certainly had done a number of things around that, but no, we had never done anything really focused on food. And only in the last year or so, when my D&D group became aware we were doing this project, did it become a more and more prominent thing. And so now we'll drop mentions of things like that from time to time. And it's definitely become more of a focal point. Again, over the last 6 months or a year, we're playing a remote game, of course, right now. And we do a lot of talk about that. So that's been fun. But no, originally it was not something that we had ever really thought about very much. It was something that was kind of a new concept for us when this project came to our door.
You know what's great is I'm seeing people online that just got the book. They're posting recipes, and some of the reviewers got right into it and tested it out, which they're not even traditionally food review people. They just love D&D and they review stuff in this world, and they dove right in and tried it. And we're getting these great responses. And everything that I've cooked, I was staying with family during the early part of the pandemic in Pennsylvania. And we made a few of these different dishes. At first, like, oh, fantasy cookbook, cool. And then like, whoa, this is delicious. And then they're making it again. And I think post-pandemic, as these gatherings start happening, and maybe this holiday season, we're going to see people starting to incorporate that element, because everyone wants, how can I get, we've all got more elaborate dice trays and fancy dice, and there's different ways to play the game and come to the table. We're always looking for those extra elements. And I think this is something that's right there, and you can, shape it based on your level of expertise and your time. I wouldn't suggest cooking, something that needs like a dragon salmon that needs to be cooked perfectly while you're also DMing. You've got to pick your timing of things, and maybe if it's like sausages or like tide me overs, you want, like, you can put them in a slow cooker. There's just different things. Soups, you can start hours before and serve it during your break. There's all these different ways to approach it. So, and you should shape it the way it fits accordingly. But I'm hoping to see a whole bunch of more pictures flood the internet over the next 2 months, as people are, they're stuck at home and they're itching to connect and do more D&D related stuff. And here's another outlet.
You can already find people on YouTube who are doing like basically how-tos. They'll show you like how to make these things. So it's not just the food photography afterwards. You can already find I've seen at least one YouTuber who is sworn he's going to cook through the entire book. And so you should be able to find guides to every recipe in there.
Yeah, so please share them with us. If you're out there, tag us. We would love to see, because this, it's near and dear to us. We'd love to see what you're creating, how you're responding to it.
Even like during the development of the book, we talked about having like a place for fans to actually put up like their own recipes or like hacks of this. And we definitely encourage, the same way that D&D is a game where the rules are just guidelines, right? And you're supposed to kind of play with what works with the people around your table. Like all the recipes in this, they're suggestions, right? And everybody should hack them to get them to work the way they want them to work for the people that are around their table. And I know I would love to see the ways that people end up modding these things. People are talking about, can I do a veggie version of this? Well, what would you do to do a veggie version of this one? And like, I'm sure there are people who are going to want to do non-veggie versions of some of the ones in there that are veggie right now. And so definitely I'm looking forward to seeing like some of the community creativity that goes into that.
Yeah, I'd say even like if it's vegetarian sausages in a dwarven dish, there's so many ways to substitute, but keep all the other core ingredients the same. Okay, in your opinion, what is the most insane culinary item in the D&D universe and why? Anecdotal homebrew counts. So that's something from Facebook. Insane culinary item in the D&D universe.
I can talk to a couple. So Curse of Strahd has some pretty dark stuff in it. They've got these like 3 different wines, is my recollection, that like one of which is like undrinkable and the others are like actually really good. I feel like elf pudding has come up in D&D lore a few times in various things. I think kind of as an inside joke to designers. Always kind of in a barrel is my recollection. Of course, it was never defined exactly what elf pudding was, but the presumption being that it was actually made with elves and it was eaten by goblins and other things. So I guess that would be high on the list somewhere.
Yeah.
What about, we have one in there actually for the gingerbread man from the Castle Greyhawk module. It's a good example. I mean, in Castle Greyhawk, there are pantries where the food like comes to life as monsters you have to confront. And like, here's a case where you're fighting this gingerbread man and he's got this enormous raisin, right? And this is actually his vulnerable spot, his Achilles heel. And so to like skewer this guy through the raisin, then you can defeat him really easily. Otherwise, it's a pretty formidable adversary. And so, in our desire to kind of contextualize a lot of these things as holiday, kind of what would the people in the city of Greyhawk have done as a holiday thing that's kind of referential to that. We have our own version of the gingerbread cookie. And in the module, he's like encrusted with nuts that give him like an enormous armor class. Actually, it's like difficult to attack him. And so we kind of have him, he has a little like cummerbund of fresh ground nuts on him. It's really cute. You see it. He actually put the raisin on his mouth, and we have that be the part that kids are supposed to eat first in the book, so that this prevents him from coming to life as long as like you eat the raisin first.
So here's another one. When you thought about the recipes, was there a search in medieval recipes, or maybe the elven recipes are based on some world culture? And that's definitely what was applicable here. I mean, we did try to benchmark these by using familiar cultures around the world, not just based it just on American or Euro tradition. do you guys want to dive into, some of the ways some of the real world culture we use to inspire it? I know there's even like the tea, John, that you had a hand in conceiving. And
Sure. I mean, yeah, I looked at both the elves and the drow, largely through a lens of Japanese and Nordic cuisine, actually. I mean, partially I like Nordic cuisine for elves just because, of course, all of my associations with elves are from the Eddas and from things that sprung from, Iceland to Gotland, right? So Nordic was definitely a reference there in the sense of locavore, very focused on, less so on kind of beef or, fatty proteins, much more on lean proteins, on fish, on, kind of foraged vegetables and foraged leaves, things like that. And so, and for the drow, again, I looked at a lot of Japanese things like that mushroom tea is largely reskinned kind of doban mushi, which is something which is great for autumn if you can get that at your local Japanese place this time of year with matsutake mushrooms, one of my favorite kind of broths that you can drink, great for the end of a meal on a brisk evening before you have to go back out into the cold. So I mean, but we tried to take, these as inspiration for things that we knew would be successful, that were tasty, right? That we could, because we don't just want to, make up some things and hope that it's going to work. We want to be able to refer to things we know are successful and agreeable to the human palate. And so we kind of used those as reference points, but then adapted them in a way that I think makes these cultures come through. Same way that for dwarves, we looked at a lot of things that would be good for a miner, right? Good for somebody that's on the go, that's busy, that are hearty, that go well with beer, that are salty.
Communal foods too, because a lot of dwarven meals are had in larger groups. So there's all these things, the philosophies behind the types of food also inform the style of cooking. Here's another.
And Kyle just to append that, one of the common things, the way we collaborated with the professional chef, Adam Reed, was that we would often, we'd come up with, again, whether it was something drawn directly from the lore in the books or in a novel, we would take it. And of course, we would usually give the contextual reference. We would sometimes write the head note ahead of time to give as much information as he could get. And then sometimes we would actually suggest a real world dish that we thought it was probably like. So these things all went into the development process, which again, made it a really fun, organic back and forth process. And a lot of times he would actually come back with something that was like, oh, well, let's try this. And sometimes we'd have to actually nix it and say, no, that doesn't quite fit because of X, Y, and Z with regard to this culture or this region. So it was really fun. It was really a fun way to explore and to kind of go back and forth on the development.
Yeah. Here's another question out there. Where's one I wanted to put in here, which I thought was the Qualinesti vegetable stew. It's like we were like, this is do a fresh take on a ratatouille. And then there's a whole point in Qualinesti culture which really informs why they would have the mindset behind a ratatouille is very applicable and comparable to what these elves were going through at the time in their culture and history and the way they would have thought and approached food, and they're these mirrored things. So while it might not be explicit, there's so much thought that's gone into it. You might be like, why is there a gingerbread man here? Well, now you know that it's really actually, it's not out of just out of the blue, like, oh, let's put a gingerbread. It's tied to something and it's researched. Look, John's sitting right here. Of course we tied it to something. So recipes in this book are gorgeous. Thank you. But photos are amazing too. I agree. I've seen there are props in shoot. How much of your props are inside these shoots? When I see a Serac green demon in the Charlton zombie photo, I thought, this is from John. That's a question from, doesn't say who, but here we go. So how much of your props are inside these shoots? And John, you have quite a few. Michael, you imported some. I think it was a real team effort. But I know, John, you drove up from San Diego with quite a few things.
That's true. Yeah, that particular thing was not one of them, though. That's something we actually had made on the spot. What you see there in the Chilton zombie thing, that's one of the things we had 3D printed.
Medieval, the dragon orb.
Yeah.
What else do we have in there?
Yeah, there's the Talisman of the Sphere, Talisman of Ultimate Evil, Hand of Vecna, of course.
Yeah.
There's at least one more.
Justin Fields made these beautiful 3D printed, homemade artifacts, legendary items, and hand painted. And it was just incredible to be able to put them next to our food, and also there's vials of poison and really cool daggers and weapons, all fitting of the type of culture we were zeroing in on. So
yeah, a lot of the like daggers and swords and vials you see, and those are stuff from my stash I drove up with. So yes, a lot of that material came from my household.
coinage too, like our friends at Dwarven Forge, Stefan Pokorny's coins are in here. Also real water Davian dragons, all types of coinage and yeah, potions, all that delicious stuff. So which recipe would you say is the most different from what you might find in a regular cookbook, a result of being inspired from D&D? So I guess which is the most D&D, uniquely D&D of these recipes?
I mean, I doubt anybody would have done iron rations other than us. Right? Like that's something we did because you have to do iron rations to be able to do like a D&D cookbook. Maybe Quithpa, which is kind of the Elven version of iron rations, would similarly be like that.
We've been trying to get rations for all these different cultures, spend time out on the trail adventuring. We initially were trying to doing a rations per se for all the different cultures. I think that's rations like that are unique. Like what is an iron ration? So it was a challenge. Like how are we going to represent that, both visually and photography and in terms of taste. So that was a cool one. Here's one. It says, Kyle, which recipes did you test or cook? Which of those were your favorite? We tested some. I tested some. A lot of them we conceptualized, and then we started to see how Adam would bring them to life and what ingredients. And some of them we had an idea because we've made them before, or they were inspired by something else we liked. And then you'd intersect them with these unique ingredients. So everything was trying to be just left of center, like what makes this, it's a fondue, but what makes it a halfling fondue? Or it's a French toast or an egg battered toast, but what makes it indulgently different and specifically halfling? It's that it was stuffed. It was this filling with nuts and then drizzled with a marmalade syrup. That's one of my favorites because I make that. I wanted to get that in the book. It just felt like such an indulgent brunch, second breakfast. And that was my niece out there asked that question. Thank you, Bryn. I've made that for you and with you. So I don't know, Michael, do you have anything which you felt like, go back to the other one too, like intrinsically D&D?
I mean, everything was intended to be, of course, uniquely D&D. And so I think the way you said it is best, this notion that even if it was something that was something kind of standard to our world or something you would recognize very well, we always made sure that there was a D&D take on it, something unique, something that made it, I think you called it left of center. I think that's exactly right. Like the idea of not just going, right, kind of out of a regular cookbook and again, slapping a D&D logo on it. That was not the intention. The intention was to really try to get as close to true D&D food in our world as you can get. And of course, a lot of that process was the idea of translating things that exist only in D&D worlds into ours. And again, we spent a lot of time with the chef and others to try to figure out how to make sure we had the right ingredients and stuff in place to make sure that these things landed the right way. So I think it was pretty successful in that respect.
Yeah, and a lot of these taverns, they don't have like fresh food coming in all the time in the D&D world. They recycle, they'll use yesterday's food over again. They'll use the grease for something else. We still wanted to make these dishes palatable and healthy, but maybe they took leftover beer and put it into the soup. Like there's little things like that, which I think you can also bring to your game if you're trying to think about what would a place like this, probably with a grade D health inspector rating, maybe a grade F. Most establishments in Waterdeep are probably the equivalent of like a D or F in New York City. A lot of things end up in the food. Leftovers end up recycled. But there's something fun about that. And so I think there's something like a little bit grimy and homemade about all the things in here, but also delicious and healthy. Here's one. Having seen firsthand Wizards of the Coast enthusiasm for Heroes Feast, do you have any other ideas percolating on more thematically focused D&D books? I know I want to do a Star Wars one because I think that needs to be done properly. And we are the people to do that. But D&D, when we could do a sequel, we had, like I said, like 130 conceptualized recipes, and a lot of them got left behind because we didn't want too many breads, we didn't want too many breakfasts, or we didn't want too many main courses, or we didn't want two turkey dishes. We tried to balance the types of meats and the types of ingredients. So there's that. I mean, Wizards has gotten fully behind it, and they always open the doors for us. They're so gracious to let us come in and play. They trust us, which is incredible. And I'm really proud of the stuff that we've collaborated to put out with them. I think it's all very high end, and having the support of 10 Speed and Penguin and Wizards to go explore and try these kind of crazy ideas. We do have more coming. Sam will be rejoining the team, Sam Witwer. So we have another book in the pipeline. And I would say it's thematically focused. It's not in universe in a sense like this. Like, we tried to look at this as if you lived in one of these D&D worlds, these recipes could be found there, depending on if we were in a big city or an outlying hamlet. They're from there. They're not gimmicky. We didn't want gimmicks in this book. And so we didn't try to go off just like naming techniques and just make it rhyming. We wanted things to be mostly applicable to regions and cultures, and sometimes to character. You know, we did something with Archon and something with Raceland. There's a few others in there like that, but it all is purposeful. And I think we would want to do something that is again in universe if we could. And I would say a sequel to this is prime. There's just so much room to explore. We had to leave so much on the cutting room floor, and I already have a folder of just 30 things kind of developed and ready to go, that plus a list we have of like 50 more. So buy the book, tell your friends, go leave positive reviews everywhere you can, but definitely buy it at the Strand tonight. Do you guys have any ideas percolating from what the thematically focused D&D books? John, you've got a book coming up. John's got a book coming up in January or December.
December, but then we don't need to talk about that here tonight. That's not a official D&D book. But I mean, yeah, there's a ton of opportunities, I think, for us to be able to work on all kinds of things related to D&D. As you said, I don't know what we're at liberty to say about our upcoming things, but certainly we think there's more to be done along the lines of Art and Arcana. Definitely that's another case where we had enough material for another book just like it that we had to leave on the cutting room floor. And so really just continuing on with the stuff we're already doing. We could be doing several more books at this point.
Yeah. I know we're almost out of time. Here's what last one. You spoke about your favorite recipes, but if you had to pick one D&D cuisine to eat for the rest of your living life, which would it be? You don't even have to explain. You can just throw it out there.
Boy, that's hard. I mean, that's John. You want to start? You got something?
I'll pick a drink. How about that? that will keep me amused and occupied.
Drink, yeah.
I'll keep on the mind flare, because then I won't notice the fact that I am eating the same thing every day, or that I don't have anything to eat. As long as I just keep drinking those mind flares, I will lack the cognition to be aware that there's a problem. So I'll pick that. I'm gonna
just you go, Michael. Go.
Well, so yeah, again, I don't know if it's a fair question. I'll be honest, because I think it's hard. The same thing. If you eat one thing, if you ask me to pick my favorite, I was going to say it. The dragon salmon is probably my single favorite dish. It's a half elf dish from Eberron. I loved that dish. You had some dragon salmon with what we called Meal's End, which was an elven dessert. Maybe start that meal with seafood bouillabaisse from the Sword Coast, which was particularly delicious. That's a pretty good meal for me. I think those three things is part of my hero's feast, at least.
Thanksgiving's almost upon us. I'm going to go with the Hommlet golden brown roasted turkey with sausage, stuffing, and drippings, because my favorite meal of the year. I love sausage stuffing with gravy. I could eat it every day, and I love ripping the skin off fresh turkey and eating it. And if I had that every day, I would feel like I was a king. So I can't go wrong with turkey and mashed potatoes and sausage stuffing and gravy. Last thing, someone said they loved the art in the book. Was it commissioned just for the book? Yes. Which of my favorites? All those, the cover and those six anchoring images for our chapter heads. Beautiful landscape paintings, I think, are in the tradition of D&D. Just all that was originally commissioned. That was the last question. Wow, so many good questions. There you are, you're back.
Yes, I'm back. Those were some excellent questions and even better answers. Thank you guys so much for having this conversation. Truth be told, a little selfish context, I just embarked on my first D&D campaign this year.
Yes.
And I've been mostly loving it so far. There was an adjustment period when I had to get used to the idea that the dice controlled so much of my being, but I think I'm getting more used to it, and I just love the imaginative aspect, and it helps that we just have the most killer DM. He is awesome. So, but yeah, enough about me. Tremendous thanks to you guys, Michael, John, Kyle, and thank you everyone watching at home. Before we adjourn, I would love to post this in the chat. Give me 1 second. All right, I'm good at Zoom, I promise. There we go. It is a link directly to our Square page where you can buy Heroes Feast from the Strand, support your local bookstore, and support these fine gentlemen so they can make Heroes Feast too.
Thank you, Keith Clayton. I saw that comment, buddy. Thank you.
And the versions you have our signed book plates, right? So people will actually be getting signed editions of these.
Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Signed editions. Get them while you can.
Only from us. There we go. All right. Thanks so much, guys. And if anyone wants watching from home wants to rewatch this, it'll exist on our Facebook page. The Facebook Live archive will be there, so you can watch it whenever you want.
Thank you. I'll share that link. Awesome.
All right. Yes, absolutely. Our pleasure. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.